Ladies and gentlemen, your hosts for the evening, James Franco and Anne Hathaway.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan, and it seems to me that people love to talk shit about Anne Hathaway without any rational reason.
It does get to me, but you have to remember in life that there's a positive to every negative and a negative to every positive, and I'm gonna go there.
The world hailed her as Hollywood's perfect princess. Yet almost overnight, after winning an Academy Award, she suddenly became one of the most hated women on the planet. This is the turbulent, humiliating, and ultimately extraordinary comeback story of Hollywood superstar Anne Hathaway. From a painful romance with a con man arrested by the FBI to becoming the target of a vicious backlash simply because she seemed too perfect, Anne Hathaway endured periods of darkness that nearly buried her career for good. So what drove this symbol of perfection into the deepest abyss? And how did she rise from the ashes to conquer Hollywood once again? In December 1990, inside a theater in Philadelphia, a spotlight fell on a woman dressed in tattered clothing. She was singing "I Dreamed a Dream," portraying Fantine, the desperate mother driven to ruin, in the musical Les Miserables. Sitting silently in the audience was an 8-year-old girl. She could not take her eyes off the woman on stage. That woman was Kate McCauley, and the 8-year-old girl was Anne Hathaway. Watching her mother pour every ounce of strength into the performance planted a sense of destiny inside Anne. She did not simply want to become an actress. She wanted to achieve the same absolute perfection her mother had displayed that night. Anne was born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in New Jersey. Her father was a strict labor attorney, while her mother was an emotionally expressive stage actress. The Hathaway family chose a Montessori education for their daughter. They taught her to be confident, to respect her own abilities, and to pursue excellence in everything she did. Anne learned quickly and excelled at nearly everything she attempted. On Friday nights, she performed in theater. On Saturday mornings, she trained as a soprano. She became the first teenager ever accepted into the intensive acting program at New York's prestigious Barrow Group Theater Company. At 16, Anne stood on the elegant stage of Carnegie Hall, singing with the All-Eastern U.S. High School Honors Chorus. Everything in Anne Hathaway's life seemed to unfold like a screenplay, already written for success. She was beautiful, well-behaved, intelligent, and talented. In 1999, she landed her first television role in the Fox series Get Real. The media began noticing the young actress with wide, expressive eyes, a radiant smile, and a perfectly sculpted nose. They described her as a combination of Judy Garland's innocence and Audrey Hepburn's elegance. In 2001, director Gary Marshall began searching for the leading actress in The Princess Diaries. He auditioned more than 500 candidates. But when Anne Hathaway walked into the room and accidentally fell off her chair, Gary Marshall knew he had found Mia Thermopolis. Anne's natural awkwardness, combined with her regal appearance, created an irresistible contrast. The Princess Diaries became a box office sensation. The film earned $165 million worldwide on a modest budget of $26 million. Anne Hathaway, only 19 years old at the time, became Hollywood's newest princess. The press adored her. Children loved her. Parents saw her as the ideal role model for their daughters. But that sweet glow of fame was already becoming a trap. Audiences began to believe Anne Hathaway was Mia in real life. Polished, obedient, graceful, and incapable of making a mistake. But could an actress remain trapped forever inside the narrow costume of a princess when cinema demanded more than a beautiful smile? In 2004, The Princess Diaries 2 was released. It earned $134 million, but critics responded with a flood of negative reviews. They called the script predictable and the story uninspired. The media began to question Anne Hathaway. Some dismissed her as nothing more than a pretty face. They argued that without her beauty and princess image, Anne lacked the talent to carry challenging film roles. Anne understood that she needed to reinvent herself. But in Hollywood, escaping the image of the good princess was never going to be easy. In 2005, production began on The Devil Wears Prada. The leading role of Andy Sachs, a young woman struggling to find her place at a prestigious fashion magazine, was coveted by numerous actresses. Fox 2000 did not initially consider Anne Hathaway. The studio desperately wanted Rachel McAdams. They offered her the role 3 times, but she rejected it each time. The producers also considered Claire Danes, Juliette Lewis, and Scarlett Johansson. Anne Hathaway ranked 9th on their list. She knew she was being underestimated, but instead of giving up, Anne went directly to the office of Elizabeth Gabler, the president of Fox 2000. Inside Gabler's elegant office, the producer watched as the young actress patiently explained why she was perfect for the role. When their conversation ended, Anne walked toward the door. Then she stopped beside a bonsai tree sitting on Elizabeth's desk. Anne lowered her index finger and traced 4 letters into the soft soil, H-O-P-E. That small, deeply determined gesture won the producer over. Anne got the role. On the set of The Devil Wears Prada, Anne shared the screen with Meryl Streep, a living legend of world cinema. To prepare for the role, Anne was required to gain weight and then rapidly lose it again to meet the film's wardrobe demands. She and co-star Emily Blunt endured strict diets consisting largely of vegetables. Some afternoons, the 2 young actresses sat together in the makeup room, holding hands and complaining about how desperately hungry they were. Their persistence paid off. The Devil Wears Prada earned $326 million worldwide and became a pop culture phenomenon. Critics were forced to see Anne Hathaway differently. She was no longer the awkward schoolgirl Mia. She had become a mature actress capable of holding her own beside Meryl Streep. Determined to cement her transformation, Anne continued choosing more provocative and challenging roles. In Havoc in 2005, she agreed to perform nude scenes while portraying a wealthy young woman spiraling into a dangerous lifestyle. In Ang Lee's Brokeback Mountain, also released in 2005, she played Lorene, a wife consumed by pain and jealousy. The film received 8 Academy Award nominations and won 3 Oscars, bringing Anne's name into prestigious international film festivals and artistic circles. By 2008, her performance as a recovering addict in Rachel Getting Married earned Anne the first Best Actress Oscar nomination of her career. She proved that she could master even the most complicated emotional material. Her career was soaring, but Anne could never have imagined that the first storm to devastate her life would not come from the film industry. It would come from her own bedroom. What happens when the man sleeping beside you every night turns out to be a con artist arrested by the FBI? In 2004, Anne Hathaway began dating Raffaello Folieri, a handsome and charismatic Italian real estate businessman. Folieri presented himself as a wealthy philanthropist who controlled an investment foundation connected to the Vatican. For 4 years, Anne lived a life of luxury beside him. They traveled on private jets and attended lavish charity galas. But in the summer of 2008, that beautiful illusion collapsed. On the morning of June 24, 2008, FBI agents raided Folieri's Manhattan apartment. The businessman was arrested and accused of defrauding investors out of millions of dollars, falsely claiming connections to Vatican officials, and laundering money. Investigators seized his possessions, including Anne Hathaway's private journals, as part of the investigation. Just days before Folieri's arrest, Anne had reportedly discovered suspicious irregularities and ended the relationship. But the media did not care. Her name appeared across the front pages of tabloid newspapers. People questioned whether she had benefited from her boyfriend's stolen money. Others mocked the supposedly innocent princess for living a glamorous life funded by fraud. Anne remained silent. She did not defend herself in the press. She did not publicly blame her former boyfriend. She surrendered all the jewelry Folieri had given her to investigators and buried herself in work. Anne's discipline and restraint helped her avoid legal trouble, but they also created a crack in the public's perception of her. People began to feel that she was too composed, too emotionally controlled, almost unnaturally so. Putting her private heartbreak aside, Anne rose toward a new artistic peak. In 2012, director Tom Hooper began production on the musical film Les Miserables. Numerous stars auditioned for the role of Fantine, including Jessica Chastain and Amy Adams. But Anne Hathaway was determined to win it, because this was the same role her mother had played 22 years earlier. To portray a desperate mother forced to sell her hair, her teeth, and eventually her body to support her child, Anne followed a brutal weight loss regimen. She reportedly survived on only 2 thin squares of dried oatmeal paste each day. Within weeks, she lost 25 pounds. She also asked the filmmakers to cut off her long, beautiful hair for real while the cameras were rolling. When the camera moved in close on Anne's gaunt, filthy face as she sang, "I Dreamed a Dream," the entire set fell silent. Her voice was no longer sweet and polished, as it had been during her Carnegie Hall years. It was broken, trembling, and filled with unbearable pain and despair. Every note seemed to come directly from her bones and blood. The performance, filmed in a take lasting more than 10 minutes, immediately entered cinematic history. Critics declared that the Academy Award already belonged to Anne Hathaway. She swept the major awards leading up to the Oscars, winning the Golden Globe, BAFTA, and Screen Actors Guild Award. On the night of February 24, 2013, at the Dolby Theater, Anne Hathaway's name was announced as the winner of Best Supporting Actress. Anne walked onto the stage wearing a pale pink Prada gown. She accepted the golden statue, looked down at it, and spoke her first words. It came true. But the moment those words left her lips, outrage began erupting across the internet. Why did a historic moment of triumph become the beginning of the most terrifying nightmare of her career? It all began with the pink dress Anne wore that night. Just 2 hours before the Oscars' red carpet began, Anne discovered that the Valentino gown she had originally planned to wear looked remarkably similar to the dress chosen by fellow actress Amanda Seyfried. To avoid the awkward spectacle of arriving in nearly identical gowns, Anne hurriedly switched to a Prada dress. The last-minute change angered Valentino because the fashion house had already issued a press release announcing that she would be wearing its design. Meanwhile, on social media, the Prada gown, with its sharply angled seams across the chest, immediately became the target of cruel ridicule. But the dress was only the spark. The real fuel behind the growing backlash was her acceptance speech. Internet users dissected every second Anne spent on stage. They claimed her smile was too precise, her breathing was too perfectly timed, her thank you speech was too polished and comprehensive. Her opening words, "It came true," were analyzed as though they had been rehearsed hundreds of times in front of a mirror. They called her fake, theatrical, and desperate for attention. The hashtag Darshers Hatha Haters was born and spread at breathtaking speed. The New York Times published an article titled, "Do We Really Hate Anne Hathaway?" The New Yorker and the Daily Mail repeatedly ran psychological analyses attempting to explain why people found Anne Hathaway so irritating. But what was the truth behind her supposedly fake expression that night? In reality, Anne Hathaway suffered from a severe psychological fear of public speaking. As she stood on stage that evening, her heart was racing and she was concealing intense panic. She struggled to remain composed so she would not fall apart. The overwhelming tension caused the muscles in her face to stiffen, and her effort to maintain control was interpreted by the public as insincerity. She was so terrified that she even forgot to thank the manager who had stood by her for 15 years, a mistake that haunted her for a long time afterward. But the deeper cause of the Hatha hate phenomenon had nothing to do with her speech or her dress. Sociologists later offered a more precise explanation. Anne Hathaway had become a classic victim of tall poppy syndrome. It is a form of collective social psychology in which an individual, particularly a woman, becomes so successful, so accomplished, and appears so flawless without committing any serious mistake that the public begins to respond with destructive envy. Unable to find a visible flaw that might make her relatable, the crowd begins longing to cut down the tallest flower. People hated Anne Hathaway because there seemed to be nothing about her to hate. Her perfection made others feel insecure about themselves. The Hatha hate storm did not remain confined to insults on social media. It began entering Hollywood boardrooms. In 2013, film producers started confronting a disturbing reality. Whenever Anne Hathaway's name was mentioned for a new project, online forums erupted with negative comments. Even though she had just won an Academy Award, studios began quietly blacklisting her. They feared that the public's hostility could damage a film's box office performance. Anne fell into a crisis. She locked herself inside her home. She was afraid to open her computer. She was afraid to walk outside because she believed that everyone who looked at her envied and despised her. The career of a newly crowned Oscar winner appeared to have fallen into the deepest abyss. With all of Hollywood turning its back on her, who would be brave enough to step forward and take her hand? In December 2013, Anne Hathaway's phone rang. On the other end of the line was director Christopher Nolan. Nolan did not care about the Hatha-haters hashtag. He did not read the articles analyzing her supposed fakeness. He knew only one thing. Anne Hathaway was one of the most talented actresses he had ever worked with on The Dark Knight Rises in 2012. Nolan invited Anne to play the female lead, Brand, a brilliant scientist in the science fiction epic Interstellar in 2014. In a 2024 interview with Vanity Fair, Anne emotionally recalled that moment. A lot of people wouldn't give me roles at the time because they were worried about how toxic my identity had become online. But Christopher Nolan was different. He didn't care. He gave me a beautiful role in one of his great films. I don't know if he knew that he was backing me at that moment, but it had that effect. On the set of Interstellar in Iceland, Anne had to wear a spacesuit weighing dozens of pounds and remain immersed in freezing water for hours. She suffered severe hypothermia, but never complained. She worked with an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward the director who had believed in her. Interstellar was released and earned more than $730 million worldwide, becoming a cinematic masterpiece. Anne's deeply emotional performance shattered lingering doubts about her abilities. But Anne's real battle was not winning back the audience. It was learning how to heal herself. Anne realized that she could no longer live in constant fear of disappointing other people. She began changing her life through the most private decisions. In 2018, after giving birth to her first son, Anne made an important choice. She gave up alcohol completely. She realized that drinking intensified her anxiety and stole precious time she could have spent with her family. She learned to accept her imperfections. She stopped trying to appear in public with a smile calibrated to the smallest detail. When journalists asked her about the period when the entire internet seemed to reject her, Anne responded with a gentle smile. "I used to be terrified of cruel gossip, but ultimately, you cannot control what other people think. I choose to focus on my own happiness." That calm acceptance opened an entirely new chapter in her life, one that none of her critics could have predicted. The film industry has always operated by ruthless rules, but time possesses a remarkable power of its own. It filters out false value and preserves genuine talent. As the 2020s began, a strange phenomenon emerged across social media platforms such as TikTok and Instagram. Younger members of Generation Z began rediscovering Anne Hathaway's older films. They watched The Devil Wears Prada, The Princess Diaries, and Becoming Jane. They saw a woman who was not only beautiful, but who gave everything she had to every frame. The backlash that had once surrounded her was officially replaced by a new term coined by the media, the Anne Naissance. Now in her 40s, Anne Hathaway had lost none of her appeal. On the contrary, she entered the most mature and compelling period of both her beauty and her career. In 2024, the romantic drama The Idea of You premiered on Amazon Prime. Anne played Solène, a 40-year-old single mother who begins a tender but complicated romance with a pop idol 16 years younger than she is, portrayed by Nicholas Galitzine. The film became a global sensation and shattered viewership records on the streaming platform. Audiences saw an Anne Hathaway who was both sensual and emotionally mature, once again commanding the romantic comedy genre she had dominated 20 years earlier. And her comeback did not end there. In 2026, Anne Hathaway reached another historic milestone when she reunited with Meryl Streep and Emily Blunt in the sequel to The Devil Wears Prada. The film earned a record-breaking total of nearly $700 million worldwide, proving the enduring appeal of the legendary trio. That same year, Anne Hathaway's name appeared across movie theaters around the world when she joined the blockbuster The Odyssey, marking her reunion with director Christopher Nolan. At the same time, news that The Princess Diaries 3 had officially begun production with Anne returning sent millions of fans into celebration. From a woman attacked by the entire internet in 2013, Anne Hathaway stood tall in 2026, a global ambassador for luxury brands such as Versace and Bulgari, a movie star whose films had earned more than $6.8 billion, and above all, a woman who was completely free. Looking back on her journey of more than 2 decades, it becomes clear that the insults of the past could never destroy genuine talent. Anne Hathaway's perfection may once have wounded the insecurities of the crowd, but it was her perseverance, kindness, and profound love for her craft that carried her through every storm. Anne Hathaway no longer needs to defend herself against the old accusations of being fake. Her extraordinary career, her happy life, and the radiant smile she wears today are history's most powerful answer.